I wanted pain and I wanted bondage, but I didn't want somebody to make me feel sexy. Like, that's not what it was about for this particular session. I just needed to contend with the sadomasochist. And at that time, for me, that wasn't one person. It was a sadist, and there was a masochist. I really had her push me to that point where the body just felt like it was on fire. And as if I was just like using this fire to fuse all of these, shards of myself back together inside of me.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Unbroken Chain. I'm Maura James, as always. And this week, I'm so pumped to bring you Yin Q. She is an incredible educator, and she has the gift of my favorite teachers, which is that she shares her experience with such specificity, and her stories are incredibly accessible. And I think that's a particular gift because she is a BDSM educator and sex work activist, and she spent many years working as a professional dominatrix. So I found her because I know rad people in New York that were part of the team for Mercy Mistress, which is a web series that Yin wrote and created based on her memoirs from working as a pro-dom. And it features an incredible Chinese-American actress and poet named Poppy Liu among just powerhouse ensemble cast and team. And it follows Yin's relationship with one particular client over the course of their time together, as well as exploring Yin's life and some of what it means to balance being a pro-dom in a rather conservative culture. So it was such a treat to spend a little time with Yin, the real Yin, in Brooklyn last week. And she was so generous in sharing some of her journey into BDSM and some of the healing and perspective it gave her. And that really blossomed into a conversation about consent, about the patriarchy, as always, and about her vision and passion for destigmatizing sex work in general, which led her to be fully transparent with her story. One of my big beliefs is that it's vital that we de-shamify our culture, and that means being way more honest and transparent with each other about our experiences, because I really believe that we are all inherently not too different from each other, and that the minute we start talking about our fears and our traumas and our dreams and our visions, we start healing collectively and realizing that we're really all pretty much on the same page and have so much to offer each other in terms of healing and wisdom and community building. So I'm just so in awe of Yin's work as a writer and an educator, and I think you'll find this conversation to be just a beautiful portal into this world. So if you want to watch Mercy Mistress before or after you dive into this conversation, you can find it at youtube.com/mercymistress. And you can also find Yin on Instagram at YinQ13. And she has lots of writing and advocacy and offerings in terms of rope bondage training and couples kink guidance on her website at yinq.net. So here she is, Yin Q, bringing a blast of BDSM, beauty and knowledge from Brooklyn, New York.
So my name is Yin Q, and I'm a BDSM educator and writer. And gosh, it encompasses a lot, and also a media creator and producer of Mercy Mistress, which is a webisode that is right now on YouTube. And I teach rope bondage classes, I teach BDSM 101 classes, and I write about it. I'm also a sex work activist. I was a professional dominatrix for almost 2 decades, and really got into the activism field then in terms of bringing community together, helping organize legal seminars for sex workers. And then recently, these past 2 years, as I was creating Mercy Mistress, I was kind of thinking about, like, what do I want this to mean besides just the story itself? And it was really to be able to break down the stereotypes of sex workers, to bring a different story to it. And then, that really pushed me into actually doing that as well, and on the greater form of creating events that are fundraising for sex workers, mutual funds, especially since just recently there was a censorship bill that passed for the internet called Sesta Fosta. And if you don't know that, it's you can easily look it up under survivorsagainstSesta.org. And it's a action that has just recently occurred in the past year, but preceding that, we saw the effects that it was already happening within politics and within culture wars of taking down Craigslist, taking down a lot of the gay porn sites, gay hookup sites, as well as now just recently Tumblr being banned. So all of these sites, these platforms where sex workers were advertising so that their careers could be done in a safe way, those spaces are being taken away. Yeah, so that kind of rallied me and so many others to really address it head on.
Yeah. And it feels sort of like bills limiting abortion. It's like, I would assume that sex work will continue to happen. It's just taking away the agency to do it in safe and supported ways.
Right. And that's what's happening, because those people who don't have the resources to create their own websites or have the communities that are more above ground, those are the people who are being forced towards the streets or forced to then find business, within bars where they don't have the time to sort of suss out the client, to find out if that person perhaps could be on a dangerous client list, or to speak to other people for references. They just have to, hustle right on the streets. And so it becomes much more violent for everyone, and much more dangerous in terms of like all the things that people are fearing. That's exactly what people are being pushed towards then. Yeah.
Is there a place for sex workers to communicate with each other and kind of help each other with protocols and safety? And like you mentioned, the dangerous client list, where does that happen?
So it was happening on the internet, but those are the spaces that are being taken away. So a lot of the things like LiveJournal and like all of those bloggings where you were able to connect with other sex workers, things that are being taken away. Now, some people are moving towards internet usage and technology usage, which I'm not going to out, because that are more encrypted, and people need to take greater measures. But then we have to also understand that the safety of sex workers is becoming more limited and less accessible. And simultaneously, then the people who are actually being victimized, people that we were trying to help, those victims who are being sex trafficked or abused by their managers, aka pimps, or being trafficked across boundaries, those are the people who don't have access, and they're the people who are organizing them. Those are the people who have access to greater means of technology, and they're being driven, on the dark web and deeper areas where the police can't track them, and that they're less visible, which makes it even more dangerous for the victims of sex trafficking. Yeah,
I'm glad you're differentiating that too, because I think sex work is a pretty big umbrella, and a lot of people without a lot of experience in it assume that anybody participating in it is perhaps a victim of some kind. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the work that you've done as a dominatrix and sort of unpacking what BDSM is a little bit, because I've heard you talk about it as a magical space almost, or a spiritual practice, and it's so much more.
Yeah. So, BDSM. I think that I'm just going to go into my origin story too, sort of like how I got into it, so that I can sort of unpack all of my journey. And it really started for myself, being a child who was really just drawn to the dramas of pain, of pain and power play. And we can see that within like all of our fairy tales that we grow up with. But I loved fairy tales. And then, later on loved comic books. I mean, the fact of like using power, sexy wear. But we always saw, like, especially within Hans Christian Andersen stories, like this idea of like blood and suffering and martyrdom and using some kind of, sacrifice, especially of body parts, to save other people. And that resonated so deeply with me because I was growing up in a household that was fraught with violence and fear and sort of the silence of violence, which is that you just don't tell anybody what's going on in the home, and in fact, those who were living within the home, my sibling, we didn't even speak about it. So it was almost a nothingness, so that tension that comes from that in childhood where you're not speaking about what's going on at home, all then nestled deep, deep, deep into my heart and my soul. And I needed to do something with it, as I started going into sexual awakening. I had just all of this tension that I needed to release, and I was never thinking that I was just going to go on a date to the movies and have a lovely kiss at the doorway. I was going, I really wanted to wrestle the person. I was seeking out blood, seeking, ridiculous hickeys, it was pretty dangerous and, or not dangerous probably at that time, but it was just messy, But it did become dangerous once I got into my 20s and I was just really pursuing sexual relationships where there weren't any boundaries. I didn't know the safe words and the negotiations and the consent of BDSM. And I had put myself as well as other people into dangerous places. So for me, once I started really learning about BDSM, reading about it and then actually practicing it and going to mentors and really becoming part of the community, it was life-changing. I mean, there were certain rituals that I will speak of later that were so cathartic that I felt molecules within my body just shift, where that little girl who was, just encased in silence finally felt free. Not only free to heal from violence, but also then to be able to take and own violence as this is my own. I can take the violence and reshape it into something that is connective and caring and nurturing and beautiful, and sometimes still really dark and scary. But I can name it now. I can talk about it now, and I can say what it is now. So it was really, it's been a transformative power for me. It's helped me heal trauma. And there are, incredible psychiatrists out there now, which I'll send you the links, I can't remember the names, who are and therapists who are writing about how BDSM can be really uplifting and can address trauma. Because if we look at not only the emotional repercussions of trauma, but also how it affects the brain, they're looking really at how the cortisol levels of the brain can actually shift using BDSM, using stimulation and just very similar to the ways that yoga can help people with PTSD. It's sort of the calming of the body, or it's using the body and the breath to connect to the mind to a higher state of consciousness.
Wow, so you're kind of creating limitations physically in the sexual space that then allow for this mental, emotional journey?
Yeah, you're creating these parameters of safety, right? And so the consent and the safe word really give you this arena then to step into the boxing ring, let's say, and then to actually have this interaction where when we think about violence and when we think about pain, your body is going into the state of fight or flight, right? So when somebody has gone through years and years of violence, there's parts of their amygdala that shut down in terms of really repressing what fight or flight means. That's why a lot of people who come from domestic abuse or childhood abuse, as they go through life, they don't know how to make the healthiest of choices regarding what is self-destructive and what's not, because we've always been in the face of self-destruction. So making those choices in our brain has not formed. So that's why you see what people have thought of as this pathologic sort of steering towards destruction. However, if you then take that fight or flight response so that you're then pairing it with control, with agency, and also with a different outcome, that this is going to be something nurturing and that you are in control of it, then you are then shifting the brain and actually restructuring how you can handle everyday life, fight or flight responses, but then also using your desire to go, to have that trigger to bring you to a different place that's more ecstatic. Yeah.
Wow. Did you have mentors that kind of gave you mentioned rituals earlier, that gave you specific containers to explore this? Is there a lineage that you've inherited?
Yeah, there is. And I will say that before I actually found the BDSM community, I did a lot of reading. But I was also reading super theoretical books, and also things like Marquis de Sade, which like you just can't put into into reality. But then things like Foucault also you can't really put into reality too, even though it's really fascinating. But then once I got out of college, went over to the San Francisco Bay Area, I found, first of all, an amazing amount of sisterhood there and sorority that was so strong with the women who worked there. That was a little bit different than I had encountered in New York previously. And specifically a dominatrix named Cleo Dubois, whose partner is Fakir Musafar. Fakir Musafar and Cleo Dubois, Fakir was they call him the grandfather of the modern primitive. So he was basically the person who really started the body piercing movement. Pretty much anyone who in America, especially of like my age and younger, who has learned how to do body piercing, that comes from Fakir's study with the Native Americans, as well as the people from the Hindi cultures within Bali, of how to pierce the flesh, use that piercing and have it be a safe thing. So he started a piercing school that spread throughout, and that people ping-ponged between like New York City and San Francisco Bay Area to really learn from him. And Cleo Dubois, his partner, was also a dom, and they created this community of leather, kinky, queer, really open-hearted, learning from the American Indians as well as the Hindi of how to use ecstatic points of their body to pierce them, pull strings, use weights to create rituals that they would often be done within communities that just would generate so much energy for the individual themselves, but then also for the collective as a whole. So it's interesting. There is actually a neurological study that has been done where they've put like there's little pads that you put on like on the people who are participating in these kinds of piercing and pulling ceremonies, and showed that and then usually there's like drummers who are also participating, and sometimes there's always any witnesses or usually have a drum, like so that you're not just a spectator, that you're a witness. I've participated in a couple of these ceremonies before, and what happens is that they show that the cortisol levels go up, and then they actually stay raised for several days, so that it's almost like a drug that sustains you. So there's not like a deep crash. You don't have a drug crash, like you would from some other kinds of things that are like just pill form. And not only were the cortisol levels of the people who were actually being pierced going up and being sustained, but also the drummers, like anyone who was like participating in the actual ceremony. It was this collective effect. It is this collective effect of creating community and creating this like sustaining high, as you will. Yeah.
Wow.
So I really bow down to Cleo Dubois, who is still doing amazing work. Her partner unfortunately passed away last year, and she's actually in the process of doing documentary work on his and her work.
So is that a ritual that has become part of your practice?
It has, and but I offer it in different forms. In New York, I have not conducted ones that are on large scale, and there's certain reasons why I haven't done that, because I don't feel like I have the authority, or I tend to shy away from conducting them for large groups. I guess because in some ways my feeling of shamanic powers is very individual. Like I really want to know who the person is and what they're going through, and that can only be done on a smaller scale. And I guess it is also like this feeling of like shying away from this guru mentality, which I have a little bit of problems with. But that said, so I also went through private piercing and pullings with Fakir and Cleo, with Cleo as my sort of more madame figure. And during my private ceremonies was really when I really dug into a lot of the violence from my past and was able to just really take it and put it on the table and own it and hug it and say, okay, well, this has happened, so let me just embrace it and say, that I love that for what it is, that I'm here, I'm alive, I want to be, and that I don't want to perpetuate that fear and that anger and that rage, but I want to, just give it a gentle love so that I can use it, because we all, I'm not going to get rid of it. And I still need to be able to tap into that rage. And I always will, but that I can see it for what it is, at least.
If you're comfortable sort of describing some of the ritual, I'd be curious to hear kind of how it manifests.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, let me describe them first, like the first really kind of life-changing ritual that I had gone through for myself, so that I can give you from like my experience. I had already started exploring BDSM with erotic partners, sexual partners, and then also doing professional dominatrix work with the really wonderful place called the Shadows. It was a house of domination in the Bay Area that provided training and a really great sorority of women that I worked with. But I also really craved being on the other side and understanding like what my masochism was about, and the idea of like really I just wanted to dig out from the depths of my soul, like what is this that has been like infested in me for so long. And I made an appointment to see Cleo Dubois, whom I had heard about through another friend of mine, and I had immediately connected with her witchiness, I guess, and also the way that she brought spirituality into it, and she didn't deny it. She really full force brought in the goddess symbols, Kali, and just different altars and crystals, and as well as natural aspects of animism. And she really infused her practice of BDSM with that spiritual aspect of her magic as well, which at the time in New York City was sort of devoid of that. It was very much like, the domination scene was very much about the dungeon. Everything was like red walls and gargoyles, and what you would almost think of as like was the stereotype, sort of the more vampiric look, And nothing wrong with that too, by the way. I loved it all. It's all great. It's all sexy. But I really wanted to like find Madame Cleo style. And also, to me, she was older than me, and I just, really loved sort of her, not that she's a mama, but her nurturing aspect, that her place of wisdom. So I had brought some of the journals from my past that I had wrestled with the most in terms of sadomasochism, where I had, in my past, in like teenage to early 20s years, I really wrestled with sadomasochism and depression, because it really bothered me coming from a childhood of violence that I was sadistic, even more so than I was masochistic. Masochism, we can all, say, okay, this is, not right, but this is not, but to be a sadist seemed monstrous because I linked it with the abusers. So I had actually in my head split, and in my spirit split myself into voices, where I would write in different voices, and I'd write through different personalities. And there was a sadist within me that I had named. And when I felt anger or rage, it was purely this person, this spirit that was writing. And so I had these conversations that were in my journals, but it wasn't a one me. It was like a split, fractured me. And I brought these journals to my first session to have them in the room with me, because I needed to wrestle with who the sadist was and this masochist was, because I was also really angry at the masochist, because to me, the masochist was also the victim. And having grown up with somebody who was victimized and also played the part of a victim, because that can often come together in terms of storytelling. I would hear my mother's stories about her victimization again and again, that I used to get really just sick of them. And I would become angry about it as a kid. So I was also really upset about that. I didn't want to be the victim. I was angry at the victim part of me inside my spirit. And so I had to bring all of those parts of me together and have them with me during this session, where I just asked her to pierce me. I asked her to flog me. I asked her to bind me. And she did it exactly how I wanted, in terms of these things that I wanted. I didn't want erotic play. I wanted pain and I wanted bondage, but I didn't want somebody to make me feel sexy. That's not what it was about for this particular session. I just needed to contend with the sadomasochist. And at that time, for me, that wasn't one person. It was a sadist, and there was a masochist. And then there were many other, choral voices too, that were just fractured. And there was something about, once, we set up a safe word and I told her that I used mercy, that the flogging, just first of all, floggings feel really good, because it's actually a whip that has many, many tendrils of leather. So it can actually go from feeling like feathers being brushed up against your skin to just sort of this pounding, wonderful shiatsu massage. And then it will escalate, should you allow it, to a really burning feel against the back, so that you almost feel like there's just heat emanating from your shoulders and along your backside. So I really had her push me to that point where the body just felt like it was on fire, and as if I was just using this fire to fuse all of these shards of myself back together inside of me, to let them go, to break apart, but also just to bring them together and really just hug them deep inside me through my breathing, through her constantly reminding me to breathe, because she was able, through her own spiritual practice, she was able to really teach me how to use that breath, the yogic breath, to use all of those endorphins and all that fire and blood rushing to activate that feeling of healing and that feeling of fusing back to one person in that session that I will never forget. And there was this one moment too, that when I actually did say mercy, and she stopped. And it was the most magical thing. It was the stopping of decades of violence that I had not only undergone from other people, but also that I had done to myself. Because I was in the past, I was just replicating the violence done to me again and again. Whereas here, it stopped. She respected my safe word, and I was in control of what she was doing to me. And that power is so important for the masochist. It was life-changing for me, for sure. And to know that I was able to then also wield that and give that as a gift to other people was also just mind-blowing to me.
So much self-forgiveness.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you confront those ugly, negative emotions in you now, what is your conversation about it? I don't even want to say that they're ugly, because that's inherently judgmental, but when the sadist comes to visit, what is your conversation with it now?
Yeah. I still have to do the breathing when my anger, and I still do, I still have a rage inside. I have to remember to use it constructively. And then also, it's really about, giving it that space and that air around it of saying, okay, well, I'm okay. I'm here for you. I'm here to listen to you. It's not exerted on other people necessarily. It's not that you can't use anger for kink play. I definitely have, and it can be incredibly cathartic to use it in controlled ways as well. But that when my sadism comes out now, first of all, it's usually within play scenarios, so that it's encouraged. And then it's a rush, and yet it's also always coupled with this feeling of gratitude to whomever I'm playing with, to be able to be allowed to be seen, to be allowed to have like the sadism come out of the box, so that it's fused with something else. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for telling that story.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely
incredible. Is that part of what, when a client comes to work with you, are you taking them through that process?
Sometimes, if that's what they're looking for. Yeah. So people I've worked with in the past have come to me with similar backgrounds of needing to really work out whether it's rage, of violence done to them, some kind of PTSD, people who have been sexually assaulted. And, first of all, I always make sure that they also have a therapist. So BDSM is not therapy. It can be conjoined, and it can be very helpful to therapy. And it can also be, there are times when people have gone to therapy for years and years, and they finally, go through a BDSM ritual and something shifts. But it's still with the support of a therapist or some kind of self-wellness and caring.
Is there a specific process that you go through when you're working with someone, or is it all just based off the individual needs of the person?
I think the first thing that I, am really want to make sure is the security that they have a community, or that they have support. I can't be the only person in their lives who knows that they're in BDSM. That I can't be the only person that they can talk to about what they're going to process with, because that feels too much like I'm just the lonely lifeboat, and that's too much. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for what they could project onto me, or what, I'm also not comfortable with that power either. So it's important for them to have a support network of friends, or possibly even family who partners who know what they're doing and what they're undergoing. So that needs to be in place. Also, I just really ask them to do a lot of writing, for themselves. They don't necessarily need to show me everything, but so that I can get an idea of like, what is their intention? What do they want to delve into? Those are the questions that I'm usually set up first. And then everything is really based on what they want out of the experience. So the difference between the ritual work that I do as opposed to the professional dominatrix work that I used to do is that the ritual work, it is tailored to the person's, how each individual wants their ritual to be. And then also giving the ideas that there's going to be parameters that I can push them to, but given their permission. And that I don't exert a power of dominance over them. So I am their guide. I provide the body to whip them. I provide the skills to put them into bondage. I provide the safe space. I provide the glass of water at the end of the day. And whatever their ritual is all about them. That they're going to, look into themselves. Going to look into their own eyes. They're not taking the pain for me. They're taking the pain for themselves. And that's going to be a little bit messy during the actual session. They might want to project more of this feeling that they're taking it from me, which is fine, but that they understand from the beginning and then at the end too, that I am not their dominatrix and I'm not their domina, and this is an equal power dynamic. Oh, wow. As opposed to the fantasy of the dominatrix, where two people are coming together who are equals, that there is a service being rendered, and that there's going to be a position of power, and that it's a very real position of power, because once that power is handed over, it is intense. You know, no one can say that it's not real. You know, it's a very, very real exchange. I have felt it as a pro-dom. I know what it is. You know, I know it's really exciting. It's really fun. And that can also help people deal with issues of power that are within like their trauma lives. Yeah, so I've have that in my personal play. And, you know, and I still enjoy it with a few others, but it's something that I pretty much keep sort of in a contained group of people because it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot too. I am so amazed by all the dominatrixes who are just doing their thing and incredible people.
Yeah. It seems like communication is just so paramount. And it's not just like you're saying now, even that you check in at the beginning and end, it's this constant negotiation. It seems like consent is always being checked in with.
Yeah, consent for BDSM is so important because things can change rapidly within the middle of a session. Something can trigger you that you didn't realize was going to come up and that you would need to say safe word. Or especially if you're in like bondage, or if you can't even speak, you know, the body always needs to be checked in with to be able to like provide consent. And even in the space of pushing somebody beyond consent lines, that has to be communicated so that it is still consent.
Yeah,
it's a very tricky thing, but it can be a sexy thing. I think, you know, and it's actually. I show it within my first episode within the first web series season, to show how, you know, the word no can then be changed into something else, and that's why we have safe words that become the real line, the real hard line of, okay, if you say this word, the curtains are drawn. You know, like the curtains are drawn, and we close the we close the show so that you can take the time to come out of this headspace. Yeah.
The one thing I love so much from watching this series was how you show kind of how, well, her name is Yin in the series too, the character, how she's navigating her own boundaries. Like there's this scene where she's, you know, turned on by what's happening, and she kind of goes into her separate area afterwards, and then she's also involved with a client where it seems like the boundaries are kind of challenging her. So what is the experience for the dom? Does there need to be a hard separation professionally in order to keep it a safe space?
There should be. But as I've shown, you know, we're in a human interaction, so it can be messy, and we're all learning, and it's all, you know, we're ever evolving, and there's so much professional boundaries that you can create, but in a space where you're also selling a fantasy too, it becomes really tricky for both the top and the bottom, even in the professional space, I think.
What was your impulse behind sharing this story? Because you're stepping into transparency in a really bold way, which I have so much affection and respect for that, because I think anything we can do to de-shamify culture is vital. But that's really big, it seems like.
Thank you. I think that a lot of it has to do with just what we were speaking about before in terms of why I'm in activism. It's because the culture around me is not supporting this kind of story. And I had to take a deep breath of like, am I going to really fully come out in a media sort of way? Because I've been working on a memoir, which is like a quieter way of telling people, you know, of like putting it out there like for years. But also I've been working on a memoir for years that's been through like the I narrative that has been again and again like ignored by or, you know, been rejected by publishing agents, saying that like, you know, this is too much, like this is too cerebral, we want more, a little bit more sexiness. You know, I've definitely heard that from plenty of men. Wow. Plenty of male publishing agents, and then even female publishing agents. I feel like there's also this feeling of like, okay, this is not for me, I'm sorry, this is a little bit too taboo, this is too scandalous, you know, this is too almost not like first wave feminists of like wanting to take the sex out of a strong female, you know. And there was something, I've always wanted to break boundaries with those kinds of messages. Being a parent now, I can honestly say that I hesitated for a moment when I was asked to write a script based on the memoir. And then once I plunged into the script, I loved it so much because it freed me from speaking from the purely I narrative. And it gave me a chance then to also really show the narratives of the other people that were in my life, the wonderful people I had encountered and who are still in my life, people within the leather community, the queer community, the POC community, but also the clients themselves, to be able to really show what it is to be a client, the courage that they need to step through the doors. The process of actually detoxifying like the masculinity and saying, okay, yes, submission is beautiful. You can be strong. It can be very almost like that type of love that was almost from a knight to a queen. What is that? There's like a particular word for that. I can't remember. Like it's like this feeling of worship and idolatry, but that comes from just this wonderful, graceful place in the heart of service. There's so many people in the community who have that type of submission, and it's such a big, warm, I don't know, these people glow. I will have to say, like, these people totally glow to me, like, because their submission is so strong and it's so beautiful that I feel like they're almost the pillars of the community, even more so than the doms who are more, we get to dress up in flashy clothes and sort of take the spotlight. But the people who really do service for the leather community are those who can, serve with grace. Yeah.
I really took that away from watching that truly a service is being provided that's really healing on a much bigger level in terms of, like you said, toxic masculinity, and just even the way that she was teaching this particular client to communicate with his other lovers. I was like, that's life-changing in ways that reach into every area of society, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many clients that I had spoken to about coming out to their partners, coming out to their wives. And I never did it in a way where I said, you had to do this, you should do this, or not. I didn't even shame them for it. It was just like, okay, well, think about what it would mean. Write your wife a letter. And then you can tear it up. You don't have to give it to her. But just like, what would it mean to actually put these into words? Because this is your chance to actually put these into words for yourself. And so many people actually then might have kept that letter for years, but then would come out to their wives like many years later or right away. And I've never seen a marriage end because of BDSM. That, and that's the truth. And like, I've met so many of the wives afterwards who were so, excited and happy for me to have been part of their husbands' their lives, so that they could feel like they were finally given the truth,
Yeah. Why? I mean, I guess this is I don't know if it's possible to answer this and just like here's the answer, but why are we so terrified about sex? Why is that so just crushingly
it's
taboo?
Just eons and eons of cultural shaming around sex and religion. I mean, there's just so many layers, right? And politics, and utmost, I think it's, and I'm going to go to this word again, but it's like the patriarchy, I feel like it is the patriarchy that shames the female body and then also shames the male body. Because once you shame the female body and say that, these parts are only for reproduction and that these parts shouldn't be seen, mirroring that, then we also only have the male body that is also stripped away from like being allowed to be vulnerable or have, certain types of pleasure that aren't thought of as masculine. I find what's really interesting within politics is that in legal terms, erogenous zones are female breasts, nipples now, and the backside, and then also the genital area. And then the male is just the front and the back, and no nipples. Like, their nipples aren't erogenous.
Right.
They're not considered erogenous zones legally. That's why they can be seen. And the amount of of men who have not explored, first of all, have not explored their nipples because they've been shamed that way. But then those who are so turned on by their nipples, which is wonderful. Then those men who are turned on by their nipples are often ashamed about it.
Right.
You know, and sometimes within BDSM, they can take that shame and make it really sexy. They can fetishize that shame. But there are many men walking around not allowing their nipples to be touched because it's like too much for them. You know, it'll make them feel something that they have been ashamed about. So yeah, I want to promote male nipples. Yes. Like, go explore your nips, men.
Amen. Yeah, we have such rigid stories about what is deviant, you know. Mm-hmm. But I feel like watching that series, it was so clear that sexuality is, of course, like anything, it's just another expression. It's a form of energy for creative human spirit. And it's silly to think that would have, you know, that there would be a quote unquote normal given the expanse of human experience and what's possible. Yeah. As a mother of girls, do you see a particular world that you want to raise them in, or are there certain things that are important to you to impart to them?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I call this mother potence, okay? Ooh. Because it's I feel like it's our generation of mothers who we've grown up with feminists, and we know what feminism means, but we're still in active, constant barraging of the binary and the patriarchy, and it's just constant everyday work of decoding, you know, different things that are out there, whether it comes to, like, you know, gendered toys or storybooks. And there are definitely fairy tales that I've grown up with that when I read them now, like, I change them, you know, I'm constantly in changing them, and my kids have caught on that I'm changing them. So, you know, that the prince and the princess don't just fall in love. They talk about rocket science first, you know. And, you know, we see that changing within Disney World, but there's still so many things that are happening on a day-to-day basis that is that needs to be pushed up against. And it's okay for me to feel like, okay, I'm that mom who's going to do that, because that's the world that I want them to live in, you know. So definitely coming out with Mercy Mistress was a big step too, in understanding that, okay, I'm really coming out as a sex work activist. Whereas before, I didn't put my photos up in terms of sex work activism. You know, I had taken down my Dom sites, and I was really careful about having my face out there. But then I thought, you know, they're going to eventually know what I've done, because I will tell them. I'm not scared of telling them what I have done in my past and what community and lifestyle that I live currently too. So I need to be able to face it head on and try not to have as much shame. You know, like, of course there's still layers. Of course there's, you know, like, we want to peel away the shame. But truth be told, you know, when I walk out my doors, I do get scared a little bit sometimes. You know, I do have a fear that one day there's going to be a bully or somebody who's going to confront them. And I just need to be able to give them the strength and the courage to be able to resiliently feel that they are supported and that they can live in a world where their mother is a sex work activist, and that's a okay thing. And that's a great thing. You know.
Do you feel like those tides are changing culturally?
I do, because I live in the bubble of New York City and I surround myself mostly with people who talk my talk, walk my walk. You know, driving out on Route 80, you already see billboards that are very scary to me, that are, you know, Blue Lives Matter and you know, fetuses within the womb feel pain. Those messages, and then of course, you know, all the things that we've already been hearing about recently of how hate crimes have spiked up in these past administration years. So I feel like there is some cultural change, and there's some not. You know, there's the Me Too movement is fantastic, and I'm so supportive, but then I also see, you know, censorship of the web. So it's this idea of like, okay, well, we want to be able to come out about trauma without then stigmatizing sex even further. Right. So we can't go back to this first wave feminist idea of that sex workers are all victims, or that the sex worker can't speak up for themselves and shouldn't have a voice, because everyone I believe it used to be like that all sex is violence or all sex is rape. You know, there was was it, Dworkin? I don't remember the name who used to say that. But yeah, so I respect everything of the long line of like feminism that we've come from, but we have to keep changing. We have to keep understanding like where are the shifting tides and trying to combat them.
What does it mean to you to be a feminist now?
Good question. I was just thinking about this because I was going to ask this on a panel to some Asian American women, and then I took I took it out of my panel discussion because I was like, okay, that might be so loaded. I feel like for me to be a feminist now really means, and I'm not no way original about this. So many people, incredible authors, have been writing about this, but it's not just to say that you're a feminist or that you're for women's rights or that you want to hold up a sign or go to a march. It's really that day-to-day actions of what do you do? What do you say? Do I use the word pussy to describe somebody who's weak? Do I use the word balls to say that I'm strong? Do I care about like where my clothes are made from? Are they being made in sweatshops where primarily women and other, people of migrant cultures are being oppressed? Because feminism does encompass so much in terms of bodily autonomy and then environmentalism and class rage and then also and racism. What it means to me now is choosing my niche of like where can I have the most effect of putting my activism power work, and then what can I do on a daily basis to infuse my life with this belief that I want to uphold all women and by doing so all people, within every culture and throughout the world.
It's almost like if it's not intersectional, it's not really feminism ultimately.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's dead on. Absolutely.
Yeah. It was so exciting too to see in the series all of these Asian American faces in lead roles. That was so exciting to see. I could tell that that's like a big part of your signal too.
Yeah, that was really important to us as the producers, Poppy Liu and Amanda Madden. We had gotten together and spoken about this many times about what we wanted to see in front of the camera, skin tones we wanted to see in front of the camera, as well as off the camera. And seeing Asian people on screen, as has been written about now, also is also a big issue, especially after Crazy Rich Asians. I can't even say the word gratifying. It's like such relief. It's such relief that finally, after all these years, I'm finally seeing Asian beauty and Asian skins. And, I'm talking about beauty of like all different kinds. I don't mean like just like the pigeonhole, like really squared off type of beauty. I mean like just people of Asian denominations coming to screens is so, it's such a relief after so many years. Because growing up, especially within magazine culture where there's like no internet around, I mean, it really was the supermodels, that told me what beauty was, like Linda Evangelisti or Kate Moss. Like those were the people who were staring at me, telling me that this is what beauty was. And I didn't know what beauty was. I didn't think of myself as beautiful. And I remember even a little girl that I babysat for said, there was like two little girls and they were arguing about like who they thought was beautiful. And this one girl said, "Oh, no, Yin's not beautiful. She's Chinese." And I was just and I was in high school and I was just like, wow, that's crazy to hear those hurtful words come out of like such a little child, but she had already been taught, right. She had been taught by her, like by the time she was like 8 years old, that this person can't be beautiful because they're of a different skin tone or different culture, different ethnicity, was shocking to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were you always aware of Asianness growing up?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you just know, you feel it, and it's discussed and it's teased. And it's also, I grew up in areas that did not have a lot of Asians. So that was, it felt very isolating. Mm-hmm. When I first came to New York City then for college, it was like, I was so excited. I mean, I became friends, and I had Asian friends when I was younger, but then there was like sort of this period in high school where there was only, I think, one or two other Asians in my high school. So I didn't connect with any of them. And when I got to college and finally became like besties with with another Asian person, it was just, and she was queer and she was, loved to eat good food. So like it was just so exciting to be able to go out and like eat Asian food without people kind of like making faces at us, Yeah, that's a big thing. To be able to gnaw on a chicken leg is really gratifying.
Was there a time when the identity of queerness came into your awareness?
Yes. So in high school, interestingly enough, before I even really understood that I was queer, I was on the debate team, and I had picked out from like the topics that you could debate was I championed gay marriage, LGBT marriage. So I must have known something because there was that, and also of course pro-choice was my other debate topic. So I got in front of like the entire school and debated gay marriage, in an era where we were just coming, like the Reagan eras, So it was really scary, but I was already feeling like, okay, this is something, but I didn't know I was connected to it yet. Mm-hmm. To me, it was just standing up for, something that I believed in. And, being kind of like the goth outcast person, I also then gravitated towards the theater people, and of course, within the theater people and chorus people, you'll also then find the other queers who are still closeted as well at that time. And it still was never necessarily talked about that we were all like, oh, we're all queer. And then in college, then I found the LGBT office. It's like, this is where I belong. Yeah. I'll have my lunch here and start doing things about it.
Yeah. God, community is just so essential for being seen and
and words, exactly. And just to be able to break that silence. There was no, you didn't see the words LGBT, or you didn't see that acronym in high school in New Jersey, where I was in high school. So at least not in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm. Just to have the tools to see yourself. Yeah.
Sure.
So where are you headed now that you've shifted from, you're not doing dominatrix work anymore, and you have the series is out and you're working on a memoir. Mm-hmm. Is that the direction that you feel like your art is going? Yeah,
I'm really devoting a lot more of my time to writing. I'm still doing activism work in terms of event productions, but I really enjoy the writing. I really want to write. Doing dominatrix work was incredibly exciting, and it's also incredibly exhausting in terms of creative energies. So the time that I was actually really in full throttle career mode with my professional domination, just one of the things that I loved so much was actually writing those emails of negotiations and getting to know the person, because they were very much like, at the time, they were very much like love letters. Like, oh, this is what I'm into. Oh, this is what, okay, wonderful. This is how I can, and then infusing that with like the fantasy of the dominatrix personality. It was so sexy to me. Like, there would be times I'd write emails and then go take a break for myself to pleasure, because it was really sexy to me. Like, that fantasy world is so, it turns me on, words turn me on. And so, I just gave so much of my time to that curation of scenes and fantasies, and taking time for sessions for that time during those decades, that now I really want to shift it to just the page, and then let the page then explode and go towards media. I have gotten the bug of script writing, screenwriting, especially because of the collaborative work that's involved in that. It's like no longer just my story, it's everyone's story, and the actors come and use these words, and they shift it into different forms where it's like somebody else's character, and they really take it and make it their own. So I love that, and working with the director and having different art designers who create like the world. It's such a magical process, and I'm addicted to it now.
Will there be another season? It feels like the way that it ends that there's...
Yeah. So my fantasy, and that I will materialize and put out into the world, is that, yes, the web series as it is now really was written as a pilot. Okay. And so it really is a 30-minute pilot that we've broken down to show as a web series on YouTube. And the way that it's structured is that each episode follows Yin, and her story unravels slowly throughout a full season of 10 stories. And that each episode then dives vertically into one or two clients' lives of how they interact with Yin, how they balance BDSM, and how they bring it or not to their outside lives. Yeah, so that was the ending of the season 1 for the webisodes, is this idea that, okay, now it's going to be about another client and how he interacts with Yin, and how she's also so much different with him, as we see from, you know, her intonation, than she is with Ken, which is the nice guy, who's the nice sweet guy that we all love, you know. And everybody's like, but are we going to see Ken? I'm like, no. Sorry. He's off in his happy land riding his bike and having a really wonderful relationship. And actually his you know, I actually based much of the feeling of who he is around somebody in particular who I had counseled that way, in terms of they came to me loaded with shame, never had a relationship where they were out, and they were a foot fetishist and service person who served me and did wonderful foot massages. And I adored him, and we were good friends, and we would talk about film and such. And then when finally it came time, I just said, you know, it's time for you to seek this out with somebody else. And now they are happily married with this in their lives, and we're good friends still. And it's really great to be able to see that and to tell their story too.
Yeah.
Give that a perspective on screen.
That's where it really felt, I understood the feeling of it as a spiritual practice, where that really came through. Like it's life-changing magic. It really is. Yeah. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I'm not alone. You know, this is something that, like, all DOMs that I've met and spoken to, but like most of the DOMs I've spoken to, they're very often working with other healing arts, whether it's Reiki or yoga or Pilates instructors, in terms of what they do. Many of them are doulas. I mean, it's incredible, like, what they bring to their clients too, either with life coaching. Many of them are calling themselves life coaches too, because it is. If you can set up like this idea that you're going to achieve a real training that affects the outside of the dungeon life too, it can be a phenomenal way to motivate someone. You know, I mean, erotic motivation is you know, it's sexy, it's fun, you know, it's not going to damage anybody, and it's a great way to, like, give yourself a treat.
You have to have such a high emotional intelligence, I think, to be able to meet people in that way, whether it's through DOM work or doula work. But that's sort of part of that divine female offering, to be able to be with people in that way. Yeah, to be able to just sit and listen to people, for sure. Provide emotional labor. Wow. It's just, like you said, a gift to be able to exchange that with other humans. Like, I mean, wow.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm so glad y'all chose to spend a little time with us today. It's not lost on me that there is an ocean of quote-unquote content floating around the internet, and it means a lot to me that you choose to spend your time and your energy and consciousness here with us. If anything, I hope that the spirit of Unbroken Chain and Yin Q can inspire one thing. I just want to blast out the signal that you are entitled and invited as a human being alive in this body right now to explore that body, explore your consciousness, explore your spirit, and let the wisdom and medicine that is inherently inside of you, because you are alive, because you have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, to come out and to manifest that magic in this world for all of us. We'll be better for it, and we will learn from you too. If you want to find more podcasts, you can find Unbroken Chain on most platforms where podcasts are found. Let me know if you want to find me on another one that I'm not on yet. Spotify, iTunes, Soundcloud, Stitcher, and there's more art and writing at maurajames.com, and you can always find me at maurajames on Instagram and at unbroken.chain, where I'm curating visual art and celebrating the signal of artists of all kinds. I'm going to leave you today with a few thoughts from Fakir Musafar, Madame Cleo's partner that Yin mentioned being a formative part of her BDSM education. And you can find more of this interview. It's a 2-part, hour-long interview on YouTube if you look up Fakir Musafar on KMVT, Silicon Valley Community Media. I love you. You're beautiful. Thank you for being here. And may you see the magic all around you until we meet again.
Our entrance to spirit is actually through the body. Why the heck are we here in a body in the first place? So that we can learn something because we have a body. And what is it we learn? We learn to transcend the body, and we can live in the body more successfully and get more out of living in a body after we've made this body-spirit connection. See, that's really my purpose in life, Mel. It's to help people make this body-spirit connection. And you can't really do that if you ignore the body. I can sit in Zazen all day, which I've tried. And all I do is get a sore butt and erotic fantasies. And some people have remarkable success with that and seem to achieve some kind of spiritual elevation. But for the most part, we have a body, and our body is very useful for finding our way backward to the spirit that animates the body, because that's what it's all about. Yes. We are just the power that animates our body, nothing more, nothing less.
Right.